So, get this, right? Everything was going well, genuinely well. The conversations were getting deeper. The energy between them was undeniable. She was initiating. She was warm. She was present. And then something just happened. With no sort of explanation, she just goes quiet, and that seemed to come from absolutely nowhere. You didn't do anything wrong. Nothing changed on your end. And yet suddenly, she's taking longer to respond, giving shorter answers, creating a distance that wasn't there last week. So naturally, your brain does what every male brains will do in moments of relational uncertainty. It starts building a case. She's losing interest. She met someone else. Maybe it's you. Maybe you came on too strong or said something wrong and didn't notice. Well, what almost no man considers in that moment, because nobody ever told him to, is the possibility that she pulled back not because something went wrong, but because something went very, very right. That the withdrawal isn't a sign of fading interest, but of deepening feeling that genuinely scared her. That the closer she got, the more she had to lose. And the more she had to lose, the more her emotional defense system quietly activated without her fully understanding why. Female psychology in deep attraction is not always linear. Sometimes the strongest signal of genuine feeling is the one that looks most like retreat. This video is the complete breakdown of why that happens, what it means, and exactly what a man should do when he finds himself in it. Attraction, when it's genuinely deepening, doesn't always feel good from the inside. That's the part that gets left out of almost every conversation about how women experience romantic connection. From the outside, a woman who is developing real feelings for someone looks like she should be leaning in, more open, more present, more willing to close the distance. And for a while, that's exactly what happens. Until the feelings cross a specific internal threshold. And then something that looks completely contradictory kicks in. The brain's emotional processing system, specifically the limbic system, doesn't distinguish neatly between the vulnerability of genuine connection and the vulnerability of genuine threat. Both states produce similar neurological activity. Both involve uncertainty about outcomes, exposure of the self to potential pain, and a reduction in the kind of emotional control that feels safe. When feelings intensify past a certain point, the brain starts treating the situation less like an opportunity and more like a risk that needs managing. And the most instinctive way to manage emotional risk is to create distance from its source. This is called emotional self-regulation through withdrawal. And research in attachment neuroscience consistently shows that it's significantly more common in women than men in early romantic contexts, largely because women tend to process relational stakes more deeply and more personally. The potential loss of a connection she genuinely values feels categorically different from the potential loss of one she's casually enjoying. The deeper the investment, the higher the perceived risk. And high perceived risk activates protective responses that were never designed with the other person's confusion in mind. Cortisol, the stress hormone, plays a direct role here. Genuine emotional vulnerability produces a measurable cortisol response in the brain. A woman who is falling for someone and knows it is managing an elevated stress state that has nothing to do with anything he did wrong and everything to do with how exposed she feels. The warmth she was showing wasn't performance, it was real. But the withdrawal isn't rejection either. It's her nervous system attempting to regulate an intensity of feeling it wasn't entirely prepared for. What makes this particularly difficult to navigate is that the withdrawal often happens at exactly the moment a man starts feeling most confident about where things are going. The connection felt mutual, the momentum felt real, and then the signal changed without warning or explanation. His confusion is completely valid, but the explanation, when understood correctly, reframes the entire situation. She didn't pull back because she stopped feeling something. She pulled back because she started feeling too much. Now let me tell you about how her wiring determines how she handles deep feelings, because not every woman withdraws the same way when feelings intensify. And understanding why requires a working knowledge of attachment theory, because a woman's attachment style is essentially the operating system running underneath every romantic behavior she produces, especially under emotional pressure. Attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby and later expanded by researchers Mary Ainsworth and Mary Main, describes the patterns of relating to others that develop in early childhood based on the consistency and emotional availability of primary caregivers. These patterns don't disappear in adulthood. They show up most clearly in romantic relationships, specifically in moments of emotional intensity, vulnerability, and perceived threat to connection. Which makes early attraction exactly the kind of situation where attachment wiring runs the show, whether either person is aware of it or not. The avoidant attachment style is the most relevant one to this conversation, because avoidantly attached, women pull back hardest precisely when feelings run deepest. This seems paradoxical until the underlying logic is understood. A woman who developed avoidant attachment learned early that emotional closeness was either unavailable, inconsistent, or came with costs she wasn't equipped to manage. So her nervous system built a specific response to deepening intimacy. Create distance before the vulnerability of closeness creates pain. The withdrawal isn't about him. It's a pattern so deeply embedded that it activates automatically when the emotional stakes rise past a familiar comfort threshold. The anxious attachment style produces a different but equally confusing withdrawal pattern. An anxiously attached woman may pull back not to create distance, but to test whether he'll close it. Her withdrawal is partly protective and partly a nervous system check. Does he care enough to notice? Does he pursue when she retreats? Is the connection real enough to survive her uncertainty? She's not playing games consciously. She's running an old program that was written long before he arrived. Securely attached, women handle deepening feelings most straightforwardly. They may still experience moments of vulnerability and brief emotional recalibration, but their withdrawal is typically shorter, less intense, and more communicative. They're more likely to acknowledge what they're feeling rather than act it out through behavior. The critical thing a man needs to understand is that none of these withdrawal patterns are personal verdicts on him or the connection. They're automated responses to emotional intensity produced by wiring that predates him by decades. Recognizing which pattern he's dealing with doesn't just explain what's happening. It tells him almost exactly what kind of response will actually help rather than accelerate the retreat. 2. What she's actually afraid of. Withdrawal without explanation looks like indifference from the outside. From the inside, it's almost always the opposite. A woman pulling back because she's scared is usually experiencing some of the most intense emotional activity she's had in a while, and the distance she's creating is a direct response to the size of what she's feeling, rather than evidence that she's stopped feeling it. Getting specific about the fears matters because they're not all the same, and they don't all require the same response. Lumping them together as she's just scared is accurate but incomplete. The specific fear driving the withdrawal shapes exactly how it manifests and what actually helps dissolve it. The fear of losing herself is one of the most common and least discussed. A woman who has a strong sense of identity, her independence, her routines, her emotional self-sufficiency, can feel genuine connection as a threat to that autonomy, even when she wants it. The closer she gets to someone, the more she starts noticing how much space he's taking up in her thoughts, her decisions, her emotional landscape. And for a woman who has worked hard to not need anyone, that level of internal real estate feels alarming. Her withdrawal isn't rejection, it's a reclamation attempt. She's trying to find herself again in a situation where she started feeling like she might be disappearing into something bigger than she was prepared for. The fear of being hurt is straightforward in theory, but operates in surprisingly specific ways in practice. It's rarely a general fear of pain. It's almost always calibrated to a previous experience that felt similar to this one. A connection that felt this real before ended badly. A man who showed up this consistently before eventually didn't. Her nervous system has pattern matched the current situation to a previous one and activated its protective response preemptively, before anything has actually gone wrong, because last time she waited until it went wrong, and the cost was significant. The fear of wanting something too much sits underneath both of the previous fears and is arguably the most quietly powerful one. There is a specific vulnerability in admitting, even just to oneself, that something matters deeply. Wanting something too much means it can be lost. And loss that comes from something she genuinely, deeply wanted feels categorically more devastating than loss that came from something she was only half invested in. Pulling back is her attempt to manage the size of the want before it grows beyond what she feels safe carrying. She's not retreating from him. She's retreating from the version of herself that wants him this much. 2. What men do wrong. When she pulls back and why it makes everything worse. When a woman withdraws, a man is essentially handed a test he didn't know he was taking, and the two most common responses both fail it in completely different but equally effective ways. Understanding why they fail isn't just useful for this situation. It's a window into the kind of emotional intelligence that separates men who consistently navigate relationships well from men who keep hitting the same wall with different women. The first response is chasing harder. She gets quieter, so he gets louder. The texts increase in frequency. The questions get more direct. Are you okay? Did I do something wrong? Is everything all right between us? The energy he puts into the dynamic doubles in proportion to how much she's pulling back, fueled by anxiety that interprets her distance as a verdict on his worth rather than a reflection of her internal state. His insecurity just took the wheel and accelerated directly into the problem. The reason this makes everything worse is that it confirms exactly what she was afraid of. A man who floods the space the moment she creates any distance communicates that her emotional regulation needs to account for his anxiety too. She wasn't just managing her own overwhelm, now she's managing his reaction to her overwhelm. The pressure increases, the safety decreases, and a woman who was already retreating from the vulnerability of deep feeling now has an additional reason to keep the distance she created, because closing it means walking back into an emotional environment that just got significantly more charged. The second response is cold withdrawal. He matches her distance with his own, but not from a place of genuine self-possession. He goes quiet out of wounded pride, stops initiating out of ego protection, creates distance as punishment, or as a defensive move to avoid feeling rejected first. This response communicates something equally damaging: that his emotional availability is conditional, that it disappears the moment she needs space, that the warmth she was experiencing was contingent on her consistent responsiveness to him. For a woman who pulled back out of fear of being hurt, a man who goes cold the moment she retreats confirms that the fear was justified. The connection she was scared of losing turns out to have been fragile enough to fracture the moment she showed any vulnerability. That confirmation doesn't bring her back. It teaches her that her protective instinct was correct all along. Both responses share the same fundamental problem. They make her withdrawal about him rather than recognizing it as something happening inside her. The man who understands what's actually driving her distance doesn't need to chase it or punish it. He just needs to hold steady while she finds her way back, which is significantly harder than it sounds and significantly more effective than anything else available. Now, Let me tell you what to actually do in situation like this. Everything covered so far has been building toward this, because understanding the psychology is only useful if it produces a different, better response in the actual moment. A man who intellectually understands why she's pulling back but still panics and chases hasn't really learned anything yet. The knowledge has to translate into behavior, and that requires a specific kind of emotional steadiness that doesn't come from technique, but from a genuine shift in how he interprets what's happening. The first and most foundational thing a man can do is stay regulated. His own emotional state is the variable most within his control and the one with the most direct impact on whether she eventually feels safe enough to come back. A man who receives her withdrawal without visible panic, without immediate pursuit, without cold retaliation. A man who simply continues showing up as the same person he was before the distance appeared. Communicates something her nervous system registers before her conscious mind does. He's safe. He's steady. The connection doesn't become unstable the moment she does. That steadiness is not a small thing. For a woman pulling back out of fear, it's often the most compelling evidence available that her fear was misplaced. The second thing is a single, low-pressure acknowledgement. Not a lengthy emotional declaration, not a series of questions designed to extract an explanation, not a performance of patience that is actually just disguised pursuit. Something simple, genuine, and completely free of demand. Something that communicates he's noticed the shift, he's not threatened by it, and the door is open without being held open so pointedly that walking through it feels like giving him something he's been pressuring her for. No pressure at all, just want you to know I'm here. Lands completely differently than, I feel like you've been distant lately and I need to understand why. One creates space, the other creates obligation. The third thing is redirecting genuine energy back into his own life. Not as a strategy to make her miss him, that framing puts him right back in manipulation territory, but as a genuine return to the fullness of his own existence that was present before she became the primary focus of his attention. A man who continues building, pursuing his goals, investing in his friendships, and living his actual life during her withdrawal period isn't being cold. He's demonstrating the exact quality that made him worth being scared of losing in the first place. His life doesn't pause for her uncertainty. And that quiet continuity, visible in how he shows up when contact does happen, is one of the most attractive things she can observe from a distance. The dignity piece is non-negotiable throughout all of this. Staying steady is not the same as being endlessly available, regardless of how long the withdrawal extends. A man can hold space for a woman working through genuine emotional overwhelm, while also maintaining a clear internal sense of how long he's willing to remain in uncertainty without some movement toward resolution. That boundary doesn't need to be announced. It just needs to exist, quietly and firmly, as a reflection of his own self-respect. Patience rooted in genuine care is attractive. Patience rooted in fear of losing her is just another form of chasing with better posture. A woman pulling back when things were going well is one of the most confusing experiences in early dating. And it costs men real connections every single day because the instinctive responses almost universally make it worse rather than better. Chase harder, and the pressure confirms her fear. Go cold, and the distance confirms her fear. Both roads lead to the same place, a connection that had genuine potential, quietly collapsing under the weight of two people who didn't understand what was actually happening between them. The reframe this video offers is simple but significant. Her withdrawal is not always a verdict. Sometimes it's a confession of feelings that got bigger than she was prepared for, of vulnerability that scared her more than she expected, of a connection that started mattering in ways that activated every protective instinct she'd spent years building. A man who understands this doesn't panic. He doesn't perform patience as a strategy. He just stays steady, holds his own dignity, keeps living his actual life, and creates the kind of emotional safety that gives her fear somewhere to land without consequence. The right woman, working through genuine overwhelm, will find her way back to a man who held steady without holding on too tight. That combination, present but not desperate, available but not waiting, is rarer than it should be. And it's exactly what the situation requires. Drop a comment below. Have you ever walked away from a situation that was actually this, thinking she'd lost interest? What happened and what do you wish you'd known? Every comment gets a personal response because this community is built on real conversation. Share this with a man who is currently misreading a woman's withdrawal and about to make it worse. And if you are not subscribed yet, do that right now. Every video on this channel is built to give men the psychological clarity that changes how they move in every relationship they'll ever have.